Watch this space. This is the journalism through the stars, illuminated from the oil of an olive tree, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. On my mark.
Engage impulse engines. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage. 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 Engage forward shields 35%. Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
China and Iran signed 20 agreements. This is TR News. Iran and China signed 20 agreements, according to Al Mayadeen English. The leaders of China and Iran agree to boost bilateral cooperation in the service of their mutual interests. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi visited Beijing on Tuesday, where he met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and signed 20 new bilateral cooperation agreements, as well as a memorandum of understanding. The Sino-Iranian meeting sought to discuss the implementation of a comprehensive strategic partnership between Tehran and Beijing. The bilateral cooperation agreements covered, according to Tasnim, fields namely economy, information technology, crisis management, tourism, fields, environment, international trade, intellectual property, agriculture, exports, health, and medical sector, media activities, as well as sports and cultural heritage. Tasnim also reported that, according to the head of the Iran-China Chamber of Commerce in Tehran, Iran will establish a commercial office in China to promote economic dealings with Chinese businessmen. Sovereignty, integrity, cooperation. Jinping and Raisi, in a joint statement, held that they stand against foreign interference in the domestic affairs of sovereign states. In that regard, the two leaders vowed mutual efforts to protect the territorial integrity of both countries, China and Iran. Raisi, according to China Central Television, said both Iran and China are strongly against the policy of unilateral actions, hegemony, and bullying, as well as foreign interference in domestic affairs. In turn, Xi explained that Beijing will boost cooperation with Tehran in the service of mutual interests. China supports Iran in its effort to protect state sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national dignity. It supports Iran in confronting the policy of unilateral actions and intimidation. China is also against the interference of foreign powers in Iran's domestic affairs, he said. Raisi, during his visit, also thanked China for its support throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as acknowledged Chinese efforts in the international area, specifically on matters pertaining to the Vienna talks. And from IFP News, Iran front page, Iranian and Chinese presidents hold talks in Beijing. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, said that the implementation of the strategic partnership agreement between Tehran and Beijing is a significant step towards stabilizing the region. President Raisi also said, Iran's ready for the implementation of China's Road Belt project. The Iranian president noted that Iran and China are friends in tough times, and strengthening these bonds is conducive to regional and global security. Xi, for his part, said China firmly believes in expansion of ties with Iran. He also announced the Chinese government's readiness to support companies willing to invest in Iran. Xi said Beijing is resolved to deepen trade and agricultural cooperation with Iran. President Raisi, also in a meeting with the head of China's National People's Congress, thanked the powerful body for its support of the promotion of strategic ties between the two countries. During Raisi's 2-day visit to Beijing, Iran and China signed 20 cooperation agreements in the presence of Raisi and Xi. Iran and China have been expanding ties in recent years. This has angered the U.S., which has repeatedly called on Beijing to stop buying oil from Tehran. China has rejected such calls, saying it will not allow other countries to meddle in ties with Tehran. Press TV, Raisi, consolidation of Iran-China ties, effective in promoting regional global security. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi says Iran and China are friends in hard times, stressing that further strengthening of relations between the two countries will contribute to the security of the region and the world. Raisi made the remarks in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing on Tuesday, as he underscored the need for expansion of Iran-China ties in different economic, trade, scientific, and cultural areas, as well as the implementation of a strategic 25-year agreement between the two countries, which he said is pivotal to peace and stability in the region. Describing the visit by the politico-economic delegations of the two countries to each other's capitals and the negotiations between the sides as important and effective in developing bilateral relations, Raisi said, despite opposition from the enemies of the Islamic Republic of Iran and China to the consolidation and expansion of relations between the two countries, these relations have taken great strides thanks to the favorable management of the parties. Stressing that Iran and China are friends in hard times and friendship in tough times consolidates bonds in other days, Raisi said that the strengthening of such bonds and friendship is effective in promoting the security of the region and the world. He pointed to Iran's determination to expand the relations between the two countries based on mutual respect and noted the development of relations between Iran and China has been moving forward, but what's been done is far from what should be done, and to compensate for the lag, greater steps must be taken. The Iranian chief executive also welcomed Xi's emphasis on respecting the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic, as well as confronting unilateral efforts in the international arena and interventionist measures across the world. The president also appreciated China's positive and constructive role in talks on removing anti-Iran sanctions. He also referred to the failure of European countries to meet their obligations, saying, Western countries once again made miscalculations about Iran. Xi, West still insists on Cold War era's wrong approach. The Chinese president, for his part, pointed to the development of China-Iran relations and said the implementation of the 25-year strategic partnership between the two countries is very effective in deepening and expanding their relations, adding, China firmly believes in the development of relations with Iran. Xi went on to criticize unilateralism and the bullying policies of Western countries at the international level, saying, unfortunately, these countries still insist on the wrong approach of the Cold War era, and this has inflicted damage of international norms and global peace and security. Supporting the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Xi emphasized the need to confront unilateralism foreign interference and threats to security and stability in the region and across the world. Elsewhere in his remarks, Xi voiced the Chinese government's readiness to support the companies that are willing to invest in Iran, saying, "The Chinese government is also fully prepared to expand cooperation in the field of trade and transit and cultural relations with Iran." Acknowledging the Islamic Republic's positions and measures in the fight against terrorism, Xi further underlined the need for implementation of the 2015 nuclear agreement as soon as possible and described the deal officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action as one of the achievements of multilateralism to resolve disputes. This from thecradle.co. Iran and China signed 20 cooperation agreements in Beijing. Over the last year, oil exports from Tehran to Beijing reached 12.6 million. Chinese President Xi Jinping received his Iranian counterpart Ibrahim Raisi on 14 February in Beijing, where the two signed 20 cooperation agreements to bolster relations between Iran and China. The two met at the headquarters of the National People's Congress of China to discuss improving bilateral cooperation in the fields of crisis management, tourism, communication, and information technology, trade, agriculture, exports, healthcare, media, sports, and cultural heritage. Raisi thanked Xi for the constructive support from the National People's Congress of China in advancing the strategic ties between Tehran and Beijing. Raisi described Iran and China as two friends in hard times, emphasizing the necessity of using the capacity of regional and trans-regional mechanisms regarding joint cooperation. Xi also affirmed his support for a proper resolution of the revival of the Iranian nuclear deal with Washington and expressed Beijing's support in safeguarding Tehran's rights and interests, according to the Chinese media. Xi further assured Raisi that China would continue to participate constructively in talks to resume negotiations on implementing the Iran nuclear agreement. After their meeting, the Iranian president told reporters that China and Iran have similar perspectives on fighting unilateralism at the international level. Last year, Iran was officially included in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a permanent member. The nation later applied to join BRICS, two international organizations in which China and Russia play a significant role. China remains Iran's largest trading partner and the leading buyer of its oil. Over the last year, oil exports from Tehran to Beijing reached 12.6 billion. Iran also plays a crucial role in the Belt and Road Initiative, a mega infrastructure and economic initiative launched by Beijing to link the economies of Europe, Asia, and Africa with an eye on expanding to Latin America. In 2021, both countries signed a 25-year strategic cooperation pact with political, strategic, and economic components. Raisi's visit to the Asian giant is part of his administration's Look to the East policy, which seeks to build alliances with non-Western world powers that bear similar political structures to Iran and oppose U.S.-led Western domination of international affairs. From MinaFN.com, this article reads, "Bolstering Iran-China ties to help world security, Iranian president." Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said on Tuesday that Iran and China are friends of tough times, adding that further enhancement of relations between the two countries could help world security trends, reporting citing IRNA. The president made the remarks during a meeting in Beijing with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, stressing the need for expansion of relations between Tehran and Beijing in different economic, trade, scientific, and cultural areas. President Raisi said that the implementation of a strategic 25-year agreement between the two nations is pivotal to peace and stability in the region. He stressed the need to fight against unilateralist efforts in the international scene as well as interventionist measures all across the globe. The president also appreciated China's positive and constructive role in multilateral talks to remove sanctions on Tehran. Referring to the failure of European countries to meet their promises, he said that the Western countries once again made miscalculations about Iran. President Raisi appreciated the level of relations between Iran and China, while noting that further steps have yet to be taken. He also voiced Iran's readiness to help implement China's One Belt, One Road initiative. The Chinese president, for his part, underlined the need for implementing the strategic agreement between Iran and China, noting that his country strongly resolved to further enhance ties with Tehran. President Xi criticized the unilateral measures taken by Western countries in the international arena, regretting that these countries continue to insist on the Cold War approaches. He hailed Iran's stance in the fight against terrorism and stressed the need for a speedy implementation of a 2015 multilateral nuclear deal with Iran as an achievement of multilateralism to resolve the disputes. And from Newsmax World, China's Xi expresses support for Iran amid Western pressure. Chinese leader Xi Jinping expressed support for Iran during a visit to Tuesday by its president as Tehran tries to expand relations with Beijing and Moscow to offset Western sanctions over its nuclear development. The official Chinese account of Xi's meeting with Ibrahim Raisi gave no indication whether they discussed Russia's attack on Ukraine. Tehran supplied military drones to Russian President Vladimir Putin's government, but says they were delivered before the war began. Xi expressed support for Raisi's government in language Beijing uses to criticize Washington's domination of global affairs. China and Iran portray themselves alongside Moscow as counterweights to American power. China supports in safeguarding national sovereignty and resisting unilateralism and bullying, Xi said in a statement carried by Chinese state TV on its website. Xi and Raisi attending the sign of 20 cooperation agreements including trade and tourism, the Chinese government announced. Those add to a 25-year strategy agreement signed in 2021 to cooperate in developing oil industry and other fields. China is one of the biggest buyers of Iranian oil and a source of investment. Iran has struggled for years under trade and financial sanctions imposed by Washington and other Western governments over what they say is Tehran's efforts to develop nuclear weapons, an accusation the Iran government denies. The U.S. government cut off Iran's access to the network that connects global banks in 2018. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price urged China to influence Iran and lower potential threats in the region, saying that would be in both of our interests. The PRC has a role to play in very clear signaling to Iran that its destabilizing activities, that its brinksmanship is not going to be rewarded. It's not going to be countenanced. It's not something that the international community is prepared to sit idly by and watch, Price said Tuesday to reporters in Washington, referring to China by its official name, the People's Republic of China. Xi said Beijing opposes external forces interfering in Iran's internal affairs and undermining Iran's security and stability, according to the government statement. It said Xi promised to work together on issues involving each other's core interests, but gave no details. Raisi's government didn't immediately release details of the meeting, but the president called the two governments friends in difficult situations in a commentary published Monday by the ruling Communist Party newspaper People's Daily. A Chinese foreign minister spokesperson asked whether Beijing was concerned that getting closer to Iran might complicate the U.S.-China ties, said their friendly relations contribute to promotion of peace and stability in the Middle East. Our relations don't target any third party, said the spokesperson Wang Wenbin. And lastly, from Manila Times, we have a slightly different perspective. This is Iranian leader Raisi begins visit to China Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi arrived in China on Tuesday for a 3-day visit, accompanied by a large delegation that includes his central bank chief and ministers for trade, the economy, and oil. Raisi will hold talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in the capital, Beijing, with the pair expected to sign a number of cooperation agreements, Tehran said. Iran and China have strong economic ties, especially in energy transit, agriculture, trade, investment, and in 2021 they signed a 25-year strategic cooperation pact. Both countries face pressure from Western nations over their positions on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was launched almost a year ago, and Iran's already under huge U.S. sanctions due to its nuclear program. Iran's emerged as one of Russia's few remaining allies, as Moscow's been pushed deeper into international isolation over the invasion. Western countries have accused Tehran of supplying armed drones to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine, a charge it denies. Last December, Washington outlined what it said was an extensive relationship between Iran and Russia, involving equipment such as helicopters, fighter jets, drones, with the latter resulting in new U.S. sanctions. Moscow's offensive in Ukraine is a sensitive issue for Beijing, which has sought to position itself as neutral while offering diplomatic backing to its strategic ally. Raisi and Xi met for the first time last September at Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Uzbekistan, where the Iranian leader called for expanding ties. This is the first state visit by an Iranian president to China in more than 20 years. According to the state-run Islamic Republic news agency, Raisi will take part in meetings with Chinese businessmen and Iranians living in the East Asian country. China is Iran's largest trading partner, IRNA said, citing the 10-month statistics of Iranian customs authorities. Tehran's exports to Beijing stood at $12.6 billion, while it's imported $12.7 billion worth of goods from China.
These are facts, they're numbers. You can quantify this.
Raisi is being accompanied by the country's foreign minister and ministers for the economy, for roads and transportation, for oil, industry, mining, and trade and agriculture, according to Iranian state television. His delegation also includes Ali Bagheri, Iran's deputy foreign minister for political affairs and nuclear negotiator. Chinese foreign minister spokesman Wang Wenbin said Raisi would meet with Premier Li Keqiang and top Chinese legislator Li Zhanshu. China and Iran enjoy a traditional friendship, and it's the strategic choice of both sides to consolidate and develop China-Iran relations, Wang said. Beijing wants to play a constructive role in enhancing the unity and cooperation of countries in the Middle East and promoting regional security and stability, he added. Raisi's first visit to China comes days after he declared victory over the nationwide protest movements. And we'll pause there. That's offhand, and that's the part that seemed a little different and weird to me. So, watch this space, and we shall return with a bit more world news. And back to more world news. The U.S. withdraws human rights candidates over his criticism of Israel. James Cavallaro says State Department said decision due to his statements denouncing apartheid in Israel, Palestine. The Biden administration withdrew the candidacy of a leading rights activist Tuesday due to his criticism of Israel just days after nominating him to serve on a leading human rights panel. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the decision to withdraw James Cavallaro's nomination to serve as the commissioner of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was made over his inappropriate past statements. His statements clearly do not reflect U.S. policy. They are not a reflection of what we believe, and they are inappropriate to say at the least, Price told reporters. Judging by some of the statements that have since been uncovered, it's fair to conclude, in fact it's true, that we're not aware of these statements and writings that he produced. Cavallaro, who has a long track record working in human rights, was informed of the decision during a meeting at the State Department on Tuesday morning. He said the decision was due to my statements denouncing apartheid in Israel, Palestine. Today, the State Department informed me that they were withdrawing my candidacy because of my view that the conditions in Israel, Palestine meet the definition of apartheid under international human rights laws, he wrote on Twitter. Cavallaro said he was asked to sign a joint statement withdrawing his nomination but declined to do so, as I played no part in making this decision and was ready to commit to another term as commissioner. On Friday, when it nominated Cavallaro to serve on the Organization of American States Commission from 2024 to 2027, the State Department hailed the activist as a leading scholar and a practitioner of international law with deep expertise in the region as well as the inter-American human rights system. He serves as the founder and executive director of the University Network for Human Rights, which trains undergraduate and graduate students in human rights, and held positions at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale law schools. He also served on the Rights Commission from 2014 to 2017. The Allgemeiner, a Jewish outlet based in New York City, published over the weekend an article in which they raised Cavallaro's past tweets that criticized Israel and support for the country among U.S. politicians, including Representative Hakeem Jeffries. Who's now the top Democrat in the House of Representatives. Jeffries, Cavallaro wrote in December, was bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups. He was replying to an article about the lawmakers' acceptance of lobbying funds from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee and similar groups. The tweet and several others have since been deleted, and Cavallaro said he did so because I was so proactively and in good faith addressing concerns the State Department had raised during the vetting process about public expressions of my personal views on U.S. policy. Other tweets referred to Israel as an apartheid state, a reference to the rights abuses committed in South Africa, which activists say are mirrored in Israel and the occupied Palestine territories. Cavallaro also said Israel was responsible for atrocities. The Biden administration decision to axe Cavallaro's nomination draws stark parallels to a recent saga at Harvard University, in which a renowned human rights activist had an employment offer rescinded and then restated amid widespread criticism. The university's Kennedy School reversed course January 19 after initially denying a fellowship to Ken Roth, the man who led Human Rights Watch, HRW, for the 3 decades. The school's decision came after Dean Douglas L. Mendorf initially blocked Roth from receiving an illustrious 1-year fellowship at the school's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. Roth led HRW since 1993 before recently retiring and has been dubbed the godfather of human rights by the New York Times. Elmendorf did not specify why he changed his mind, but said he had been in error. The withdrawal of my appointment comes on the heels of the Kennedy School withdrawal of fellowship offered to Ken Roth due to his advocacy for human rights in Israel, Palestine, a decision that's since been reversed, wrote Cavallaro. Censorship of human rights advocates who denounce apartheid in Israel also affects countless Palestinian academics, activists, and students who do not have the platform Ken Roth or myself have, he added. And again, that's AA.com, Anadolu Agency. And here's the original article that spawned this situation. A human rights activist who recently accused U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of being bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups has been nominated by the U.S. government to a post with the Organization of American States. The candidacy of Professor James Cavallaro for a commissioner's post with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, an agency within the OAS, for the 2024 through 2027 term was announced on Friday by the State Department. Keep in mind, this article is what spawned the issue, so in it the language will make it seem as though, of course, his nomination had not been withdrawn, because it hadn't. Cavallaro, a co-founder and executive director of the University New Network for Human Rights, was described as a leading scholar and practitioner of international law with deep expertise in the region, as well as the inter-American human rights system, in a State Department release. However, a survey of Cavallaro's social media activity by the Allgemeine revealed a multi-year history of incendiary posts critical of U.S. foreign policy, Israel, and pro-Israel elected officials. In one December 2022 tweet, now deleted, Cavallaro invoked language and imagery often associated with anti-Semitic claims of pro-Israeli political and financial control over U.S. domestic policies or politics. Bought, purchased, controlled, Cavallaro wrote alongside a link to an article about the funds raised for Representative Jeffries by IPAC and other pro-Israel groups. In other tweets, Cavallaro characterized Israel as an apartheid state and accused the U.S. and Israel of atrocities. Cavallaro began deleting the offending tweets from his timeline on Monday after the Allgemeine reached out to him for a comment. A reply had not been received by press time. I think that's probably where he made his mistake, right? Is beginning to delete the tweets. Cavallaro teaches courses on human rights law and practice at Wesleyan University, Yale Law School, and UCLA Law School, and he's previously taught at the law schools of Harvard and Stanford. The University Network for Human Rights supervises interdisciplinary engagement in human rights practices at universities across the country and beyond, according to its website. Announcing him as the U.S. candidate for the IACHR seat on Friday, State Department Deputy Spokesman Vedant Patel said Cavallaro would bring valuable expertise to the Commission's work. But other posts from Cavallaro's social media feed express views consistently at odds with Biden administration positions. That I can understand as well. Not being in line with the administration that's appointing you is just not going to work. In February 2022, responding to Representative Ro Khanna's visit to Ramallah, where he met with Palestinian students, Cavallaro asked, "Did they say anything about high-level U.S. congressional delegations legitimating and praising the Israeli apartheid state?" Cavallaro has also promoted the views of Rania Khalek, a journalist and prominent anti-Israeli activist who is also a supporter of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In April 2021, he tweeted at Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that she should watch one of Khalek's videos to help you figure out what and how is going on in Palestine. More from that later. We'll actually play that video. While the video is no longer available on Twitter, it appears that Khalek was promoting her video Two-State Delusion, Israel's a racist one-state nightmare, in which she claims that Israel's committing ethnic cleansing is not a democracy and does not belong in the effing 21st century. The IACHR is an of the Organization of American States and a regional body headquartered in Washington, D.C., that promotes security, democracy, and economic development in the Americas. While it focuses on the Western Hemisphere, in May 2021, Cavallaro asked why the OAS was labeling Hamas a terrorist organization and suggested that support for human rights was contrary to U.S. foreign policy. Substance aside, why does the OAS have a position on Hamas? He wrote, if you're promoting global solidarity, how about supporting human rights instead of U.S. foreign policy? While the IACHR, hold on, that's, yeah, amazing. While the IACHR commissioner role is not a Senate-confirmed position, he's also made inflammatory comments about the character of both Democrats and Republicans, calling Senator Joe Manchin bought and paid for, and labeling Senator Susan Collins pedantic, self-righteous, and pompous, and to resign over her repeated moral failings. In November 2021, he wrote of Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana that I don't know whether to call you senator or shameless mother effer. Actually, I do. Cavallaro's comments are similar to those that plagued the nomination of Sarah Margon, who withdrew her nomination to human rights post in the State Department in January over Republican objections to her anti-Israel comments, and to Neera Tanden, whose Twitter trolling of senators cost her the directorship of the Office of Management and Budget. The Allgemeine reached out to Representative Jeffries, Senator Collins, Senator Manchin, Senator Kennedy, and the State Department, but they didn't immediately reply to the Allgemeine's request for comment. Member states of the Organization of American States, OAS, will vote to fill 4 IACHR seats, including the one Cavallaro has been nominated to during elections at the June 2023 General Assembly in Washington, D.C. Commissioners serve in personal capacity and do not receive a salary either from the U.S. or OAS, but the OAS does provide them with a per diem when traveling on IACHR business. Ooh, hit you where the money is too. Very interesting. So here's, there was a mention of a video by Rania Kalik.
Is a mantra government officials repeat, knowing it's bullshit. The two-state solution for Israel and Palestine is a mantra government officials repeat, knowing it's bullshit.
We support a two-state solution.
Two states living side by side.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
It was always a distraction so Israel could keep stealing more Palestinian land under the cover of an illusory peace process. It wasn't a solution so much as a delusion, and it worked. After decades of negotiating for two states, Israel is an apartheid state with little islands of Palestinian ghettos under Israeli control. That's how the supposed Palestinian state went from looking like this to looking like this. Disconnected Palestinian areas surrounded by Jewish settlements. Former Israeli leader and infamous butcher of Sabra and Shatila, Ariel Sharon, explicitly laid out the strategy, saying, we'll make a pastrami sandwich of them. We'll insert a strip of Jewish settlement in between the Palestinians and another strip of Jewish settlement right across the West Bank, so that in 25 years' time, nobody will be able to tear it apart. Two states will never happen. Israel deliberately made that impossible. That's because Israel is a settler state built on the deliberate removal of 750,000 Palestinian natives in 1948, what Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, as part of a European colonial project driven by the ideology of Zionism, or Jewish nationalism. Wait, can I just say that, or did Facebook already ban criticism of Zionism at the behest of the Israeli government? The Zionist project to seize Palestinian land and expel Palestinians continues. But maintaining a Jewish majority requires denying the basic rights of non-Jews, as well as continuous ethnic cleansing, making so-called facts on the ground, that is, Jewish settlements, to physically block a Palestinian state. The two-state solution was already a usurpation of Palestinian rights, denying them the right to return to the towns from which they were cleansed in 1948, and relegating them to the remaining 22% of their original territory. By getting Palestinians to agree to a two-state solution that would never ever happen, the Israelis bought themselves time to change the facts on the ground for their pastrami sandwich. What actually exists is one state, with about 7 million Jews ruling over 6 million Palestinians. Despite the Israeli state policy controlling both groups, only one has full rights. So much for the only democracy in the Middle East. There are 1.6 million Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They or their ancestors survived 1948. They're second-class citizens who face institutionalized discrimination, with 50 laws on the Israeli books that explicitly discriminate against non-Jewish citizens of Israel. Another 4.5 million Palestinians live in the West Bank and Gaza, under brutal Israeli military control for the crime of not being Jewish. They have zero civil rights. When elections take place in Israel, these people are excluded from voting for the government that controls their lives. Some 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank are walled off by Israeli separation barriers that snake across their neighborhoods, unofficially annexing Jewish settlements into Israel, while relegating Palestinian neighborhoods to exclusion zones, with separate roads and checkpoints that control their every movement. Gaza is an open-air prison where nearly 2 million people are under Israeli air, land, and sea blockade. Israel even regulates the caloric intake of each resident. Israel claims it ended the occupation of Gaza, but if you control who can enter and exit, imports, exports, airspace, and the sea, then you control the population. Palestinians have been shot by the hundreds for even approaching the high-tech border fence. Israel created the most sophisticated and effective mechanisms of control in the world, while everyone was distracted by two states. Liberals say two states is the only option because one state would mean Jews might be in the minority. This argument is straight up bigotry. Imagine we were talking about white and black people. It would be totally unacceptable for liberals to argue against giving black people rights because it would undermine whites as a majority. So why do we accept it with Israel-Palestine? We certainly wouldn't tolerate someone talking about the threat of a growing Jewish population, but Western officials routinely warn of too many Palestinian babies. So what if they're the majority? Either you support equal rights for all, or you don't. Even progressive American politicians are guilty of this overt racism.
Over time, realities are bearing down on Israel. Demographic realities, births and deaths, what the region looks like.
This is the same argument made in favor of apartheid South Africa. The same was argued in favor of segregation in the Jim Crow South. That to give black people equal rights would undermine white demographic rule and make white people less safe, the oppressor class fearing that the oppressed will do to them what they've done. Look, if your state requires demographic engineering to maintain an ethno-religious majority, then you're not liberal, you're not a democracy, and you don't belong in the fucking 21st century. When liberal is you're not engineering that the oppressed will do demographic rule Jim Crow South. That to give black people equal rights would undermine white demographic rule and make white people less safe, the oppressor class fearing that the oppressed will do to them what they've done. Look, if your state requires demographic engineering to maintain an ethno-religious majority, then you're not liberal, you're not a democracy, and you don't belong in the fucking 21st century. Liberal Israelis warn against right-wing policies, it's not based on human rights concerns, but because it'll harm Israel's image as a democracy, or because they're afraid their Palestinian subjects will one day be granted Israeli citizenship, and Jews will lose their privileges. The Israeli left warns that Israel will become an apartheid state, but it already is. It's already denying civil rights to non-Jews and bestowing the state's largest on Jews in illegal settlements. It already has one set of laws for Jews and another to subjugate non-Jews. South Africa wasn't a democracy that also practiced apartheid. It wasn't a democracy because it practiced apartheid. It granted some autonomy to townships and Bantustans, just as Israel lets the Palestinian Authority police its own people and deal with their sewage. If Israel wants to be a democracy, then it must end all discrimination in the territories it administers, which includes the West Bank and Gaza, and grant equal citizenship to the residents living between the Mediterranean and Jordan. But the Biden administration is sticking by this two-state charade. Not only does Israel get to keep stealing Palestinian land, it gets to keep the Syrian land it stole too.
Will your administration, the Biden administration, continue to see the Golan Heights as part of Israel?
Look, leaving aside the legalities of that question, as a practical matter, the Golan is very important to Israel's security as long as Assad is in power in Syria.
Does this mean Israel's going to be pro-Assad thought now? You know, legal issues aside, I can steal your car now because keeping it for myself makes me feel safe. If the Biden administration was serious about peace, they'd be honest. But they can't do that. Israel's an important arm of American imperialism in the region.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make.
They'd be honest.
The best
can't do that. Israel's an important arm of American imperialism in the region.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
Israel's a client state that enforces American hegemony onto its neighbors through bullying and war. It was the first sectarianized country imposed on the Middle East, and its creation reshaped the entire region, setting it on a course for conflict, war, and chaos up until today. And there are the powerful pro-imperialist lobbying groups that police American politicians on this issue. There's even a book about it that, of course, made the lobby go mad. So Palestinians will continue living in misery as non-citizens in Israel and in multi-generational refugee camps all across the Middle East. Also, Israel can have its ethno-supremacist state. A Palestinian whose dad was kicked out of his home in 1948 or 1967 can't even enter the country, while a Jewish American from Brooklyn with zero ties to the Middle East beyond some ancient fairy tale can be gifted Palestinian land tomorrow and get a free house, healthcare, education, and guns. The irony is this is being maintained by a woke administration, promoting itself as being opposed to racism. America prides itself on democracy, yet here it is arming a Jim Crow settler apartheid state to the tune of over $3 billion a year, while feeding us lies about a future peace that will never be. So how much longer are we going to pretend that there's a two-state illusion at the end of this tunnel? How much longer until those who claim to be liberal support the obvious solution? One state with equal rights for all. If the past is a guide, then Palestinians face a bitter future.
Okay, one more story on this matter. This is by Zoe Khalid. Nominee who called Biden a senile gaffe machine, withdrawn by State Department. This is GlobeEcho.com. The State Department on Tuesday withdrew the nomination of an Ivy League professor who called then-candidate Joe Biden a senile gaffe machine and criticized other officials for the pro-Israel views. I really like that clip by Rainey Akalik on Biden, by the way. I didn't know that these would be in synchronicity as they are now. Professor James Cavallaro was nominated last week to serve on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in the Organization of American States, but the State Department's link to the announcement no longer works, and spokesman Ned Price told reporters Tuesday that the nomination was withdrawn after his Cavallaro's past controversial tweets were discovered. State Department mocked for a State Department nominee who called Biden a gaffe machine was withdrawn on Tuesday. His statements clearly do not reflect U.S. policy, Price said. They're not a reflection of what we believe, and they're inappropriate to say the least. We've decided to withdraw our nomination of this individual. We were not aware of these statements and writings that he produced, Price acknowledged. Cavallaro's past remarks were first reported by the Algemeiner, a nonprofit news organization that covers the Middle East, Israel, and matters of Jewish interest around the world. That outlet found the 2020 tweet that criticized that candidate Biden and several others, all of which Cavallaro has since taken down. The nominee's controversial comments were noticed by the State Department during the vetting process. Another one of his tweets criticized House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries as being bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups. In another instance, Cavallaro described Israel as an apartheid state. Cavallaro put up a new Twitter thread on a Tuesday that said the state had informed him that it was this last tweet that disqualified him from serving on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Today, the State Department informed me that they were withdrawing my candidacy because of my view that the conditions in Israel, Palestine meet the definition of apartheid under international human rights law. Biden struggled with crowds during his campaign during his presidency. He also said he removed many of his previous tweets because he was proactively and in good faith addressing concerns the State Department had raised during the vetting process. Cavallaro also argued that his nomination would not have affected U.S. policy on Israel, and he said that his removal from the process would deprive the Commission of a committed, experienced advocate for human rights in the Americas. Okay, watch this space, and we'll be back with Al-Aqsa news. Also, don't forget that your engagement through a like, share, and subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Engage. Northern Syria border disputed, and ChatGPT has written our intro for this. So let's get after it. What has been Russia's role on the northern border of Syria is the first question that I asked. ChatGPT responded, Russia's played a significant role in the northern border of Syria, particularly in the ongoing Syrian conflict. Since 2015, Russia's been one of the key supporters of... Let's see if I can make this a bit bigger without having to scroll sideways. Since 2015, Russia has been one of the key supporters of the Syrian government in the conflict, providing military, economic, and diplomatic assistance to President Bashar al-Assad's regime. In the northern border region of Syria, Russia has been involved in various ways. For example, in 2019, Russia and Turkey reached a deal to establish a demilitarized zone in the province of Idlib, Russia and Turkey reached a deal on Syrian land, it says here. Which borders Turkey. The deal aimed to prevent a potential military operation by the Syrian government forces and their allies against the opposition-held region, which could have triggered a humanitarian crisis and a new wave of refugees. Moreover, Russia's been working closely with the Syrian government to reclaim control over territories held by various opposition groups, including those on the northern border. In 2018, Russia-backed Syrian forces recaptured the city of Afrin from Kurdish forces, which was previously controlled by the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Furthermore, Russia has been involved in negotiations between the Syrian government and Kurdish forces, which control several areas on the northern border. Russia sought to facilitate a peaceful resolution to the conflict between the two sides, which has been ongoing since the Syrian government withdrew from the region in 2012. Overall, Russia's role on the northern border of Syria has been complex and multifaceted, as it's been working to balance its interests. Next, I asked, please give further detail regarding the control of border crossings, like but not limited to Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. The Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa border crossings are two of the main crossings on the northern border of Syria. These crossings have been of great strategic importance for various actors in the Syrian conflict, including the Syrian government, opposition groups, and international aid organizations. During the early stages of the Syrian conflict, the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings were controlled by the Syrian government. However, as the conflict intensified, various opposition groups gained control of the crossings, allowing them to smuggle weapons, supplies, and fighters into Syria from Turkey. These crossings also became important for the delivery of humanitarian aid to opposition-held areas. In 2016, the Syrian government, with the support of, and I stopped. Before going further, let me reword that. Please give further detail regarding, but not limited to, Russia's role in the control of border crossings, like but not limited to Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. Sure, I apologize for misunderstanding your question earlier, it says. Regarding Russia's role in the control of border crossings like Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa, it's important to note that Russia has been supportive of the Syrian government's efforts to regain control of these crossings. So Russia is supporting Syria here. The Syrian government has sought to reassert control over these crossings, to control the smuggling of weapons and supplies to opposition forces, and to limit the flow of foreign fighters into Syria. Yeah, so this idea that someone other than Russia is controlling these, maybe the UN. In 2020, the Syrian government, with the backing of Russian forces, launched a major military campaign to retake the Idlib province, which includes Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. The campaign was successful in recapturing several strategic towns and villages, including Sarakeb, which is located on the M5 highway that connects Damascus to Aleppo and which runs through Bab al-Hawa. So Bab al-Hawa runs through Sarakeb. As part of the campaign, the Syrian government sought to regain control over the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is a key transit point for humanitarian aid and supplies coming into opposition-held areas of Syria from Turkey. The crossing is under the control of the opposition-backed Syrian Salvation Government, which has been accused by the Syrian government and its allies of misappropriating aid and funds intended for civilians. While the Syrian government and Russia have not yet succeeded in retaking Bab al-Hawa, their campaign has put pressure on the opposition forces controlling the crossing, and it remains a key objective for the Syrian government and its allies. So to say that it's controlled by opposition forces means that it's controlled by Turkey for the most part. Everything that is not controlled by Russia and in effect Syria, the Syrian government backed by Russia, is controlled by, it's said, opposition forces or terrorists, or use some derogatory term, but it's actually the puppets of Turkey. However, the situation at the border remains fluid, and it's possible that the control of the crossing could shift again in the future depending on the dynamics of the conflict. This is great, thank you. Please detail this border issue from the perspective of the SSG. It mentioned the Syrian Salvation Government earlier. It's a political entity formed by opposition groups in Syria's northwestern Idlib province in 2017. You could substitute Turkey for opposition groups, actually, it seems at this point. I mean, maybe not all of them are Turkey supported, but the ones that in this area that are being referenced to, including HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, seem to be backed by Turkey. The SSG operates in opposition-held areas and seeks to provide governance and service to the population in those areas. This group's been backed by Turkey and has been instrumental in providing aid and assistance to civilians affected by the conflict. The Bab al-Hawa border crossing has been under the control of the SSG since 2015, and the group has used the crossing to import humanitarian aid, medical supplies, and other goods into opposition-held areas. The SSG has accused the Syrian government and its allies, including Russia, of attempting to seize control of the crossing, to cut off aid to opposition-held areas, and weaken the opposition.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
The SSG has been vocal in its opposition to the Syrian government's military campaign to retake the Idlib province, which has been ongoing since 2020. The group has accused the Syrian government and Russia of targeting civilians and using indiscriminate forces in their military options. The SSG has also accused the Syrian government of seeking to use the humanitarian crisis in the region as a weapon of war by blocking aid deliveries to opposition-held areas. The SSG has been critical of the United Nations for its role in facilitating cross-border aid deliveries through the Bab al-Hawa crossing in 2021. The UN Security Council voted to reduce the number of aid access points from 4 to 2, with the Bab al-Hawa crossing remain one of the 2 access points. The SSG has argued that the reduction in aid access points would lead to a humanitarian catastrophe in opposition-held areas, and has called on the international community to support its efforts to maintain control of the crossing. Overall, from the perspective of the SSG, control of the Bab al-Hawa crossing is crucial for providing aid and assistance to civilians in opposition-held areas, and any attempt to seize control of the crossing would be seen as an attempt to weaken the opposition and worsen the humanitarian crisis. So how is the common popular sentiment of opening the border crossings for aid, etc., not identical to the position of the SSG? In a sense, and this is probably dangerous for the Russian government and other governments in the area who don't want to see Turkey and the SSG in control, it probably is not really positive for the rest of the world to know that, but that seems to be the truth, that the rest of the world is in alignment with the SSG here. Besides Bab al-Hawa, what was the other access point at the Security Council allowed? There was a mention up here about Bab al-Hawa being one of the 2 access points, and Bab al-Salam is the other. The access point that the UN Security Council allowed for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria in 2021, in addition to Bab al-Hawa, is the Bab al-Salam crossing on the Turkish-Syrian border. I wish that ChatG pretext would find some way to make those connections. The question that I asked earlier was, in reference to Bab al-Hawa and Bab al-Salam. And then it didn't give that information in the answer. It just gave, it explained how Bab al-Hawa played a role in it significantly, but forgot to mention Bab al-Salam. Maybe forgot, I don't know if that's the correct answer. But Bab al-Salam, or the correct terminology, Bab al-Salam is located to the east of Bab al-Hawa, it says here, near the city of Azaz, and it was under the control of the opposition groups until 2016, when it was recaptured by the Syrian government forces with the support of Russia. The crossing has since been reopened and serves as a transit point for humanitarian and commercial goods coming into Syria from Turkey. The Bab al-Salam crossing has been seen as a less critical access point for aid deliveries compared to Bab al-Hawa, as it's located further from the conflict zone. It's been subject to restrictions on the types of goods that can be transported across the border. Nonetheless, the UN has used the crossing to deliver aid and assistance to civilians in need in opposition-held areas, and its continued operation has been seen as important for maintaining some level of humanitarian access into Syria. The next question I asked was, what 4 access points were accessible before 2021? Please detail the UN Security Council voting to reduce the number of aid access points from 4 to 2. And it says, before 2021, there were 4 border crossings that the UN had been authorized to use for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. In addition to the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings, the other 2 crossings were al-Yarubiyah. The crossing is on the Syria-Iraq border, and it's been used to deliver aid into northeast Syria. And it was under the control of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and had been authorized by the UN Security Council in 2014. This is really pro-UN, if I'm not mistaken. And then Al-Ramtha, crossing on the Syrian-Jordan border, and had been used to deliver aid into southern Syria. It was authorized by UN Security Council in 2014 as well. However, in 2020, Russia and China vetoed a proposal to renew the mandate for cross-border aid deliveries through both the Al-Yarubiyah and Al-Ramtha crossings, leaving only the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings as access points for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. Then in July 2021, the UN Security Council voted to renew the mandate for cross-border and deliveries into Syria, but with a reduced number of access points. As a result of the vote, the mandate was extended for another year until July 2022, but only the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings were authorized for cross-border aid deliveries. So the UN is in control of these. The UN Security Council is in control of these by way of, there have been some dissenting votes by a couple of countries, mainly the ones that we're discussing here. The decision to reduce the number of access points was a contentious one, with some countries arguing that it would limit humanitarian access to Syria and worsen the humanitarian crisis in the country. So the UN, for the most part, was probably pro having these border crossings open, but others, including Russia, argue that the situation in Syria has improved and that the Syrian government should be given greater control over aid deliveries into the country. Ultimately, the decision to reduce the number of access points was seen as a compromise that allowed for some level of cross-border aid deliveries to continue, while also taking into account the concerns of those who argued for greater control over aid deliveries by the Syrian government. So that happened in July 2021, so it's been almost 2 years since that. That's a pivotal point, especially relative to where we are now with Syria having aid be the priority at this moment. The SSG is backed by Turkey and the Syrian government is backed by Russia? This is the question. And ChatG Pretext answers, yes, that's correct. The Syrian opposition, including the SSG Syrian Salvation Government, is primarily backed by Turkey, which has provided military and other support to opposition groups fighting against the Syrian government. Turkey's been involved in the Syrian conflict since 2011 and has supported various opposition groups in their fight against the Syrian government. On the other hand, the Syrian government is backed by Russia, which has been its key ally in the conflict. Since 2015, Russia has provided military support to the Syrian government, including air support, which has helped the government regain territory from opposition groups. It's worth noting that it's ChatG pretext there. Have Turkiye and Russia considered any This is my question. Have Turkiye and Russia considered any negotiations or had any discussions regarding this issue? Yes, ChatGPT responds. Turkey and Russia have been involved in negotiations and discussions regarding the situation in Syria.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Turkey and Russia support opposing sides in the conflict, yet they've sought to cooperate on certain issues in order to reduce tensions and help bring an end to the conflict. In March 2020, for example, Turkey and Russia reached an agreement to establish a ceasefire in the northwestern Syria province of Idlib, which had been the scene of intense fighting between Turkish-backed opposition forces and the Syrian government forces backed by Russia. The ceasefire helped to reduce the level of violence in the area and avert a potentially catastrophic humanitarian crisis. In addition, Turkey and Russia have been involved in negotiations regarding the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is the key access point for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. And we'll have some footage on Bab al-Hawa a little later. In June 2021, Turkish and Russian officials held talks to discuss the future of the crossing amid concerns that its closure could worsen the humanitarian situation in Syria. While the talks did not result in a resolution to the issue, they signaled that both Turkey and Russia recognize the importance of humanitarian access to Syria and are willing to engage in a dialogue to address the issue. Overall, while Turkey and Russia have different interests and priorities in Syria, they've recognized the need to work together on certain issues in order to help resolve the conflict, says ChatG pretext. Yeah, but there's the background, and here are a few articles related. This is just a few hours ago, 12 hours ago. Earthquake aid enters Syria. Opposition runs through new route. UN trucks carrying essential humanitarian assistance, including shelter materials, mattresses, blankets, and carpets, enter northwestern Syria through Bab al-Salam border point between Turkiye and Syria. An aid convoy has passed through a newly reopened border crossing into opposition-run northwestern Syria, where help has been slow to arrive since last week's earthquake, which killed more than 41,000 people in both Turkey and Syria. A caravan of 11 United Nations trucks entered Syria through the reopened Bab al-Salam border point on Tuesday after Bashar al-Assad's regime agreed to let the world body use the crossing for aid. Before the earthquake struck, almost all the crucial humanitarian aid for more than 40 million people living in opposition-controlled areas of northwest Syria was being delivered through just one crossing from Turkey, Bab al-Hawa. Ankara had offered to the international community that it can open 2 border crossings in the southern Kils province for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Syria. Turkey's Foreign Minister Cavusoglu said on Monday. The trucks were loaded with essential humanitarian assistance, including materials, mattresses, blankets, carpets. Paul Dillon, a spokesperson for the UN International Organization for Migration, told the AFP news agency. Activities and local emergency teams have decried the UN's slow response to the quake in the areas, contrasting it with the plane loads of humanitarian aid delivered to regime-controlled airports. The U.S., which refuses ties with Damascus, called on both the regime and the opposition to work to allow in aid. Everyone should put aside their agendas and affiliations in service of one pursuit, and one pursuit only, and that's addressing the humanitarian emergency, the humanitarian nightmare that's unfolding in parts of northwest Syria, State Department spokesperson Ned Price told reporters in Washington. That's 3 Ned Price mentions there. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on Ned Price. The UN also launched an appeal for $397 million to cover 3 months of life-saving relief for victims in Syria, and it was close to a similar plan for Turkiye. Millions of people across the region are struggling for survival, homeless, and in freezing temperatures, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. Here's a short from the medialine.org. Unable to cross, only death despair in Syrian-Turkish border. This is with video. I'll read through the article first here. You get to see a bit of Bab al-Hawa. Following the earthquake, many Syrian refugees in rebel-held Idlib province have not received any aid or help from the outside world. The situation at the Bab al-Hawa border crossing between Turkey and rebel-controlled Idlib government in Syria is particularly dire following the massive twin earthquakes that hit in the early hours of Monday morning. Speaking exclusively to the media line from the crossing activist and aid worker Abdul Kafi Alhamdo said no aid was getting across. The situation at the border here is unbelievable. The roads are open, but they're not allowing any aid to cross, only dead bodies, he says via WhatsApp. The situation here is chaos. So this is 2 days ago. It may have changed since then, but this is in relation to when only bodies were being allowed through Bab al-Hawa. According to the UN, only one convoy of 6 vehicles carrying aid has managed to cross the border into northwestern Syria since the first 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck. The convoys barely made a dent in the relief and search and rescue operations going on in Idlib. What's happened in Syria since the start of the earthquake is indescribable. Syria and Idlib cannot survive this kind of catastrophe. We're already living in a state of war, and the UN's not doing anything at the moment, the father of 2 says. According to Alhamdo, who's the project coordinator for I Still Rise, a local charity that runs various education and relief programs in Idlib, no official aid came across the border between Idlib and Turkey in the first critical 48 to 72 hours. I've been here at Bab al-Hawa crossing since the start, and you can see the roads are open and not destroyed, but the only vehicles coming from Turkey are those carrying dead Syrian brothers, he describes. Why is it that just the dead are allowed to cross? We need aid, we need search and rescue teams, we need help. Syria since 2012 has been in a state of civil war during which over 500,000 Syrians have died and a further 13 million have been displaced. The humanitarian situation was particularly acute in Idlib, the last area that's not under control of the Assad government, which is still having much of its infrastructure and buildings bombed regularly by regime and Russian airstrikes. On top of this, many who had fled the conflict and the Assad regime have temporarily settled in Idlib and have little shelter and cover from the bitter winter weather. So this is from the perspective possibly of Turkey, but at least from the perspective of people who want Bab al-Hawa open, and possibly even from the perspective of the so-called opposition forces of the Syrian government. Over half the population, around 2.8 million people who were internally displaced in Syria, came to Idlib out of a population of just over 4 million. Emmanuel Massart, the Middle East Operations Officer from Medicine Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders, explains to us, adding, and that figure, the people internally displaced in Syria, is only likely to increase following the earthquake on Monday. MSF, which has been one of the few international charities that have been operating in Idlib since the start of the civil war in Syria, said the closure of the border crossing had not affected them yet, but could in the future. So far, we've not tried to cross, but we and our staff and facilities have been operating and in overdrive since the earthquake struck. Massart explains, adding, we're seeing a lot of injuries from the rubble, and also now the cold weather conditions are making matters worse. MSF has in Idlib 7 hospitals and over a dozen clinics, facilities that have been under significant strain and pressure since the earthquake struck. Because we're operating in Idlib for the past 10 years, our teams have been able to react very quickly. But what we're finding now is that because of the level of destruction, a lot of our partner organizations need help too. The international charity, despite having a highly experienced staff, stresses that working in a war zone that's now been hit by one of the strongest earthquakes in the past century is putting a strain on its teams on the ground. There definitely will be a psychological impact on staff. They were dealing with war in Idlib and Syria for 10 years before, and this earthquake is only going to add to that, Emmanuel states. Along the Turkish border are a host of small villages and refugee camps, hosting and supporting internationally displaced persons who have fled the conflict elsewhere. One of the villages that I Still Rise gained access to in the first 24 to 48 hours was near the town of Reyhanli, just west of Bab al-Hawa crossing. I went out to see if I could help there and saw a sea of destruction, hundreds of houses destroyed, Alhamdo explains, adding, my colleague and I went to the village of Reyhanli that crosses the Turkish border. We found this body, Haydar, whose family had survived, but most of his school friends who were trapped under the rubble later died. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Thursday urged the Security Council to authorize the opening of new cross-border humanitarian aid points between Turkey and Syria to deliver UN aid to earthquake victims. Some 4 million people living in the rebel-held areas of northwest Syria have been relying on humanitarian aid transported via the Bab al-Hawa crossing as part of a cross-border aid operation authorized by the UN Security Council nearly a decade ago. But the flow of aid stopped following Monday's 7.8 magnitude earthquake that's killed more than 37,000 people in 2 countries, prompting Guterres to call for more crossings to be authorized. This is the moment of unity. It's not a moment to politicize or to divide, but it's obvious that we need massive support, Guterres told reporters. According to Alhamdo, Haydar and his family had not seen any aid or search and rescue teams since the earthquake struck Reyhanli. The villagers of Reyhanli were in desperate need of help to find and rescue those under the rubble, Alhamdo told us, adding, and we didn't have the equipment to help them. Either we were digging with our hands and trying to reach those buried under the earth. It was awful. Alhamdo, whose I Still Rise charity runs a school project not far from Reyhanli in the town of Adana, region of Idlib, says the voices he heard of those children trapped in the destroyed buildings following the earthquake will haunt him for years to come. This earthquake has affected me psychologically. There's so much death and destruction I could not escape it, he states, adding, even when I got home and saw my children, I could not smile in front of them. Even though I was thankful they were alive, I'm still hearing these cries and screams in my ears from those people who were trapped under the rubble. Syria's been under Western sanctions since the government's brutal crackdown on protesters in 2011, which spiraled into civil war. Guterres stated that no sanctions would hamper relief efforts. This is a moment in which everybody must make clear that no sanctions of any kind interfere with the relief to the population of Syria in the present moment, Guterres said. Turkiye said on Thursday it was working to open 2 more border crossings with Syria to deliver aid. And here's a bit of video from that border.
Now, as you see here, this is in fact one of the trucks that is carrying many dead people, Syrian people who died in Turkey. Now they are coming into Syria. In fact, the road is open, of course, in front of these dead people, as you see here now. As you can see, these are dead people that are moved now into the Syrian lands. You see? In fact, the road is open, but and there are no logistic problems, in fact, but there are logistic problems in front of the humanitarian aids to keep people alive, as you see now.
All right, a quick story from The Guardian. Syria's Assad, you would presume they would be against Syria and Russia in this article, but who knows. Syria's Assad agrees to open 2 more entry points for aid to earthquake victims. So this is, let's see, Monday, the 13th. UN announces regime leaders' acceptance of border crossing points for humanitarian aid to reach rebel-held province. Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad has agreed to open 2 border crossing points to allow in a greater volume of emergency aid for victims of the earthquake that's devastated parts of Turkey and Syria and killed 36,000 people. Assad's decision was announced and welcomed by the UN Security General Antonio Guterres, who said 2 crossing points between Turkey and northwest Syria, Bab al-Salam and al-Ra'i, would be open for an initial period of 3 months to allow for the delivery of humanitarian aid. Until Monday, the sole entry point to Syria's rebel-controlled Idlib province had been through Bab al-Hawa border crossing. Previous efforts to open other humanitarian routes had been vetoed by Russia and China, who had claimed such a movement without Assad's consent would undermine the sovereignty of the regime. In Damascus, Guterres announced Assad's change of mind after a closed-door meeting of the UN Security Council on Monday.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
As the toll of the 6th February earthquake continues to mount, delivering food, health, nutrition, protection, shelter, winter supplies, and other life-saving supplies to all the millions of people affected is of the utmost urgency, Guterres said. Let's take a look at this map. So you have Syria here, Aleppo, and there's Bab al-Hawa. And where's Bab al-Salam? I presume it's up here. And there's Azaz, Aleppo. Turkey's right here. The Turkish toll, opening these crossing points along with facilitating humanitarian access, accelerating visa approvals, and easing travel between hubs will allow more aid to go in faster. The Turkish toll now exceeds 31,643 killed in the quake. Let's see. I'm just looking for information on the borders. Yeah, and then it goes into these ideas about Tahrir al-Sham, who's supported by Turkey, and maybe they just don't want to speak against the Turkish government. Speaking shortly before the announcement of the new additional humanitarian crossing points, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said, "We're a week into this, and every single minute means one more life. The numbers are ticking every single day, so we must act now. It's important that we show the Syrian people that we're there for them, that we're ready to provide for them the assistance they need." Well, I mean, the UN could just open that's the thing. And I think that they have just as of recently, but if they haven't, then that's something that we advocate for. And let's go back in history a bit. This is a 2019 document. It's the full text of the Turkey-Russia agreement on northeast Syria. The memorandum of understanding was reached after marathon talks between Erdogan and Putin in Sochi. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have agreed to push back Kurdish forces or fighters from a safe zone along the Turkey-Syria border after marathon talks in Sochi. The meeting on Tuesday centered on the security situation in northeast Syria following the launch of Turkey's cross-border operation on October 9th. This is 2019, aimed at driving the Kurdish People's Protection Units, which Ankara considers terrorists from the area. Below is the memorandum of understanding reached by the two countries, provided to Al Jazeera by the Turkish Foreign Ministry. President of the Republic of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, agreed on the following points. The two sides reiterate their commitment to the preservation of the political unity and territorial integrity of Syria and the protection of national security of Turkey. They emphasize their determination to combat terrorism in all forms and manifestations and to disrupt separatist agendas in the Syrian territory. In this framework, the established status quo in the current Operation Peace Spring area covering Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain with a depth of 32 kilometers will be preserved. Both sides reaffirm the importance of the Adana Agreement. The Russian Federation will facilitate the implementation of the Adana Agreement in the current circumstances. Adana Agreement, just a moment on that. Okay, so apparently the Adana Agreement is a 1998 agreement regarding the expulsion of the Kurdistan Workers' Party from Syria. So starting at 2019, or starting 12 noon, October 23rd, 2019, Russian military police and Syrian border guards will enter the Syrian side of the Turkish-Syrian border outside the area of Operation Peace Spring to facilitate the removal of YPG elements and their weapons to the depth of 30 kilometers from the Turkish-Syrian border. Which should be finalized in 150 hours. At that moment, joint Russian-Turkish patrols will start in the west and the east of the area of Operation Peace Spring, with a depth of 10 kilometers, 6 miles, except Kamishli city. All YPG elements and their weapons will be removed from Manbij and Tal Rafat. Both sides will take necessary measures to prevent infiltrations of terrorist elements. Joint efforts will be launched to facilitate the return of refugees in safe and voluntary manner. A joint monitoring and verification mechanism will be established to oversee and coordinate the implementation of this memorandum, and the two sides will continue to work to find a lasting political solution to the Syrian conflict with the Astani mechanism, and will support the activity of the Constitutional Committee. And here's another article. This is from yesterday, and it's Al Jazeera's earthquake aid reaches northwestern Syria via newly opened crossing. 11 trucks carrying humanitarian assistance passed from Turkey to northwestern Syria through the Bab al-Salam crossing, UN says. So we have Bab al-Hawa and Bab al-Salam being used, right? But what about the other two? It's Yarubia and there's one other. An aid convoy has passed through a reopened border crossing into rebel-held northwestern Syria, where help has been slow to arrive. And it's this language, you know, it's like, it should not be rebel-held, it should be Turkey-controlled. Should be Turkish-controlled, right? I mean, whether or not Turkey has full control of it over it, you know, it's debatable, just like whether or not Russia has full control over Syria's decisions on the borders. As hopes fade of finding people alive under the debris more than 200 hours after the 7.8 magnitude quake struck, the focus is switched to providing food and shelter to the vast numbers of survivors. Death toll surpassed 40,000 on Tuesday. The passage marked the first time a United Nations convoy has used the crossing to deliver aid since its closure in 2020. The United Nations closed it, by the way. 11 international organizations for migration trucks carrying humanitarian assistance passed through the Bab al-Salam crossing, the UN said. The crossing had been closed for UN aid since 2020. Another 26 interagency trucks went through the Bab al-Hawa border crossing until now, the only entry point for UN humanitarian aid to directly reach people in opposition-held northwestern. UN cross-border aid is a lifeline, UN humanitarian affairs chief Martin Griffiths wrote on Twitter. The crossing had been closed for UN aid since 2020 under pressure at the UN Security Council from Syrian regime ally Russia, calling instead for all relief for the war-torn country to enter via government-controlled areas. So there we have it, right? The convoy passed through a day after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad agreed to allow UN aid to enter from Turkey via 2 more border crossings, marking a shift for Damascus, which has long opposed cross-border aid deliveries to the rebel enclave. And it's rebel. So Al Jazeera, you know, their lack of impartiality is prevalent here too. And the delay in opening new crossings stalled immediate relief and search and rescue efforts when the time for effective search and rescue is tragically running out, the International Rescue Committee said in a statement. UN launches an appeal. Nearly 9 million people in Syria were affected by the earthquake, the UN said, as it launched a $400 million funding appeal to help the situation. UN Security Council, there's more detail on the aid itself. And Guterres said the UN is in the final stages of preparing an emergency appeal. He urged the international community to provide the emergency funding without delay and the human suffering from this epic natural disaster, and so on. The UN would supply a range of basics but would need assistance. Fears have grown for survivors on both sides of the border, with the UN saying more than 7 million children have been adversely affected. And there we go. Here's another. And this is from 2 days ago. Did U.S. pressure force Turkey to let Syrian Kurdish earthquake aid into rebel-held northwest? Ankara relents, allowing the first humanitarian aid and disaster relief to enter devastated northwest Syria from the country's Kurdish-run northeast. The first aid convoys, this is Amberin, this is almonitor.com, by the way. And the first aid convoys from Kurdish-run northwest Syria were allowed to cross into the northwestern part of the country that was leveled by the massive earthquake centered in Turkey. Syrian Kurdish leaders confirmed to Al Monitor Monday, saying that U.S. pressure had likely forced Ankara to cave. The breakthrough followed a week-long standoff between the Kurdish self-described Autonomous Administration of Northeast and East Syria and Turkish-backed Sunni rebel groups.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
So the Autonomous Administration of Northeastern Syria, also known as Rojava, and Rojava, I think that means west, actually. It's a de facto autonomous region in northeastern Syria. It consists of several or self-governing subregions, including Afrin, Jazeera, Euphrates, Raqqa, Tabqa, Manbij. The region gained its de facto autonomy in 2012 in the context of the ongoing Rojava conflict and the wider Syrian civil war, in which its official military force, the Syrian Democratic Forces, has taken part. While entertaining some foreign relations, the region's not officially recognized as autonomous by the government of Syria or any state except for the Catalan parliament. Sahih Muslim, co-chair of the Democratic Unity Party, which shares power in the AANES, told Al Monitor that 55 trucks carrying relief supplies collected by the people of Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, and a further 53 trucks containing aid donated by the people of Manbij, who are all governed by the AANES, had crossed via Manbij into 2 Turkish-occupied areas. This is a cool alternate source. I like that, by the way. All right, here's a bit of video on, let's see, the title of this is Syria Quake, Surprising Condemnation Over Al-Assad Approval for Aid Crossings. Forgive me if I skip through any of the portions that aren't related to that.
Deir is one of the hardest hit areas in Syria. So, Zaina, more aid is going through opposition-controlled areas in Syria with 2 more crossings opening. Tell us about how it's all going to work.
Well, there is desperation on the ground. We are in Genderes, one of the hardest hit areas in northern Syria. In this town alone, more than 1,100 people were killed. The whole neighborhood now reduced to rubble. People here say that they've lost their family members, neighbors. In this house alone, if you remember that newborn child who was rescued, still attached by the umbilical cord, she's now in hospital and she lost her whole family. So you have many stories like like this here, but unlike in southern Turkiye, here in Syria, you don't see the international rescue teams. You don't see an international aid effort to help the people on the ground. News of the opening of the two border crossings undoubtedly will help the situation on the ground. So far, aid has been trickling in from the Bab el-Hawa crossing. Now the Syrian government says it's going to allow aid to enter from two other crossings from Turkiye. And the international, the community, the United Nations are hoping that their initial response, which really has been criticized as inadequate, will step up. But people here are angry because they're saying, why does the United Nations or the world have to wait for an approval from the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad? As you know, people here do not consider him a legitimate leader, but a brutal dictator who killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people.
And just to pause, we could focus on Bashar al-Assad, but you could also focus on Russia voting with Syria to veto the situation, controlling the 4 border crossings at the UN. So it could be Russia as well, and it could also you could blame UN for the way that they construct the voting, right? That 1 or 2 vetoes can stop something like this. It's how humanitarian is a decision like that.
The course of the war. They were hoping that the international community would just use those routes without his approval. And the fear here is that what Bashar al-Assad is trying to do is gain political legitimacy by showing that he is still in charge. So you have that anger, and at the same time, you also have a lot of frustration. People here feel that they were abandoned by the international community.
Zaina, tell us more about what you've seen, what you've witnessed since arriving inside Syria.
Well, poverty, years of war, displacement camps, really scars of war that haven't been healed. Before the earthquake, people were struggling to survive. After the earthquake, they're still struggling to survive. This is really a forgotten part or a forgotten corner of Syria. People find it difficult to work, to make ends meet. And at the same time, if you look behind me, there's no rescue and search operations ended on day 5. Rescuers had no other choice. They said that we lost countless of lives because we kept on appealing for heavy machinery that never came. Yet across the border in southern Turkiye, up to today, day 9, missing survivors are still being found alive and being pulled from the ruins.
Indeed.
So people here feel frustrated, but it's not new. Ever since we've been covering this conflict and visiting these areas, we've heard this time and time again. Those in the opposition feel that the world really never stood by their side, and their greatest fear today is that they believe the Syrian president is capitalizing on this earthquake, engaging with the United Nations, which actually operates in government-controlled areas. And here you don't see any international aid workers on the ground.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you in those government-controlled areas about the broader rescue efforts across Syria.
Well, yeah, since the aftermath of that earthquakes, a number of areas in Syria were affected, among them Aleppo, Latakia, Hama, areas under the control of the government. Many people lost their lives too, and there were hundreds of collapsed buildings as well in those areas. But immediately in the aftermath of the earthquake, we saw planes landing at Damascus airport, Aleppo airport, from a number of countries, even though the Syrian government was blaming what they're calling Western sanctions for preventing preventing aid from landing, but aid was landing. And we have to remember the United Nations, it's different agencies, the UNHCR, UNICEF, WHO, they all have offices in government-controlled areas, including the International Committee of the Red Cross. So immediately what we saw were pictures emerging from government areas where people were giving handouts, food, shelter, and that we did not see in the northwest corner of Syria. So the hope here is that the international aid effort will step up. I mean, the United Nations even acknowledged that they failed the Syrian people. The head of the UN aid chief, that is what he said. But
you know, as per our ChatGPT research, etc., the United Nations is in control of that border. The United Nations is in control. They made the decision, albeit, you know, by way of a vote that included vetoes by a minority. They're still in control. They still made the decision.
But I can tell you, people here believe those are just empty words.
Zaina, thank you very much for bringing us.
And here's a short from graydynamics.com. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, a situational assessment. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the last major threat to President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. This is because of their refusal to engage in any peace talks and their highly organized nature. Due to their steadfast refusal to make peace with Assad's regime, HTS continues to launch attacks on enemy forces. Furthermore, as Turkey abandons rebel groups they previously backed, these fighters will likely fall under the HTS umbrella. In addition, with Turkey increasingly worsening relations over various issues with other NATO members, it's unlikely that the U.S. will help them by striking at HTS. And here's an article from yesterday. RepublicWorld.com is the site, and the headline is Syrian rebel leader with links to Al-Qaeda seeks help for earthquake-ravaged Idlib. And, you know, we could think of this as Russian propaganda. A Syrian rebel leader, just a moment. A Syrian rebel leader with links to Al-Qaeda is calling on the international community to help the last remaining rebels-controlled areas in Syria recover from the earthquake. I'm going to stop using the term rebel here. The leader, identified as Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, known by his nom de guerre, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, appealed for international aid to help people in the quake-hit northwestern province of Idlib, Syria, The Guardian reported. The plea from the leader came a week after, a series of massive earthquakes jolted Syria and Turkey, leading to the death of over 36,000 people in the region. While the government-held area of Syria did manage to get aid from both the international community and the Syrian government, the plight of the people of the northwestern region remained mostly neglected, The Guardian reported. The leader, who has a whopping $10 million U.S. government bounty on his head, urged the United Nations to understand the gravity of the situation in the northwestern region. The United Nations needs to understand that it's required to help in a crisis, al-Jalani told The Guardian. From the first hour of the earthquake, we sent messages to the United Nations asking for aid. Unfortunately, no support for our search and rescue teams arrived, as well as no specific aid to combat the crisis. When it comes to the allocation of humanitarian aid in Syria, there had been a political tussle between several international actors. The Syrian rebel group and the Bashar al-Assad administration. While it was earlier reported that the Syrian government is willing to help the northwestern rebel-held region, the Al-Jalani said that the Assad regime cannot be trusted. Who is Abu Muhammad al-Jalani? It was the year 2013 when Jalani was officially designated as terrorist by the U.S. group, or the U.S. government. The Syria leader was the founder and former leader of Jabhat al-Nusra Front an al-Qaeda-affiliated group in Syria. However, in an effort to reconcile his links with the international actors, he broke off his ties with al-Qaeda and ISIS. According to PBS Frontline, Jilani currently heads the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an anti-Assad Islamist group. According to The Guardian, the Islamist group, which is held by Jilani, played a crucial role in the rescue operations on the northwestern front. The area faced the major wrath of the earthquake, recording over 700 deaths in the region alone. UN admits the negligence. The revelation from Jilani came a day after the United Nations relief chief Martin Griffiths admitted that the international community had failed the people of northwest Syria. At the Turkiye-Syria border today, we've so far failed the people in northwest Syria. They rightly feel abandoned, looking for international help that hasn't arrived. My duty and our obligation is to correct this failure as fast as we can. That's my focus now, Griffiths tweeted on Sunday. He then went on to share the visuals of the delivery of UN relief aid to the distressed region. Trucks with UN relief are rolling into northwest Syria. I'm encouraged by the scale-up of convoys from the UN Transshipment Center at the Turkish border. We need to open more access points and get more aid out fast. However, the quake-hit people believe that the help from the international body is too little too late. Leader of the Syrian civil defense group, Raed al-Saleh, said that the senior official's visit to the region was too little too late, the New Arab News reported. Since the moment the earthquake struck 7 days ago, we've been appealing to the UN to send urgent assistance to aid our rescue operations in northwest Syria, al-Saleh said. For days, and that's the thing, they being on the ground, being actually connected to the people, being a part of a de facto government in that area, they know who's limiting what, and maybe from another perspective, we may not see the UN as the culprit here, but it looks as though the UN, by way of Russia and Syria, are the culprit for not allowing those borders to be open. And for days, these calls went unheeded, and during this time, countless lives have been needlessly lost. This visit is too little too late, he added. On Sunday, a Syrian activist shared pictures from the Idlib province where the quake-struck family hoisted the UN flag upside down in an act of protest against the international body. That's powerful. Here's another bit of a blurb on the UN opening 2 borders. Syria opens 2 more borders crossings for humanitarian aid.
Up to date on UN efforts. Rula Amin is back with us. She is Senior Communication Advisor with the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, and she is in Damascus, Syria today. Welcome back, Rula. We spoke to you in the earliest hours after the quake disaster. It's a pleasure to have you back with us today.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thanks for having me. Actually, I just got back from Aleppo, and the scenes we have seen there, the suffering, the pain that we witnessed is just immense.
Well, can I begin with that? Because I did want to exactly start there. It was quite striking to hear the UN Secretary General speak yesterday and say helping people of Syria is of the utmost urgency. And I was wondering what you've seen and what your teams have seen to lead you to characterize it in that way of utmost urgency. What is the situation on the ground now?
The first thing you see, of course, is the destruction, the building that had collapsed. Then you start seeing people on the streets, in the parks, sleeping in their own cars because either their homes had collapsed or their homes had been weakened by the earthquake and now unsafe, and they cannot stay in it. So they choose to stay outside. It's very cold. It's freezing temperatures. Many are in collective shelters. It's makeshift shelters, actually, mosques, schools that had been turned into centers where these people can have a roof on top of their heads. More than 200 shelters just in Aleppo city alone. We saw thousands of people who had become homeless and displaced again. We met with a lady who had been displaced many times during the past 12 years because of the crisis. She just returned back, and now she lost her home, and now she's homeless again. Really, it was so painful to see them. And beyond the immediate needs, of course, which are huge because they need assistance in shelter, they need food, they need water, they need hygiene, they need medical aid, they need psychosocial support from the trauma that they have been through. All these are immediate needs, but we also saw that this earthquake is going to have a long-term impact on these people. It has destroyed the infrastructure, the water facilities, schools, hospitals, even the sources of clean water are at risk. And that's why our understanding, we're trying to assess what are the priority needs, how can we address it in the fastest way possible, and how can we mobilize resources so we are able to do so.
Short and long term, obviously, that call for an international response. The big development in terms of responding to those significant needs, the word that has just broken that Bashar al-Assad, in discussing with Mr. Griffiths, agreed to open 2 more border crossing points from Turkey into northwestern Syria. So in that part of the country, to the opposition-held territory, there will be more.
And notice, they'll use his name first, but then they'll pair it with other people because he's not in control in that sense. If he was in control of that area, then it would not be a disputed area. You know, it would be an area that there wouldn't need to be ceasefires in it. So he's not in control of that area.
More aid getting in. What will the impact of that be, do you think?
Well, that's a very welcome agreement and a welcome gesture. We needed to have more access to Northwest Syria because, you know, there more than 4 million people were dependent on humanitarian aid even before this earthquake hit. And there was only one border crossing allowing the United Nations to bring in aid into Northwest Syria. Now, we had some pre-positioned tents and relief items, and they were disposed and I mean, they were used by the partners on the ground to assist people, but nowhere near enough because the needs are huge, and more than 3 million people were displaced inside that area anyway before the earthquake. Yes. So you can imagine how much needs there were. Now with these 2 border points opening, we are hoping to be able much more, much needed and desperately needed assistance to reach all those who were affected.
Only 52 truckloads of aid into that region so far. So one would expect, as you say, the numbers allowed in will grow considerably. It's interesting, though, I'm not sure if you heard these comments. We've reported a lot on the White Helmets who have been involved in the search and rescue, the civil defense organization that's operating in the Northwest. They heard about the UN deal. Broke was the word the U to then continue. I'm wondering this morning, soon, from the UN perspective, the moment would come soon to pivot from search and rescue to recovery. I'm wondering this morning, Ms. Amin, from the UN standpoint, has that moment arrived? Is all hope lost, and is it now a matter of recovery?
You know, maybe in theory, people say after 1 week, it's hard to find survivors. But I think for the families who have relatives under the rubble, they are still hopeful and they're still trying, even when the official rescue and search teams have stopped. It's hard to tell people to stop hoping. What we are hoping is that the world now, pays attention again to the suffering of the Syrian people for the past 12 years, and maybe even put more concerted effort to end this crisis, to allow them to go back to their homes, to stop being displaced and being so vulnerable. Part of why this earthquake was really shattering to their lives is that they were vulnerable anyway, even before it hit. And they're vulnerable because this country had been in crisis for 12 years. They lost their homes. Many of the hospitals were destroyed, many of the schools, deep economic crisis. The country was divided. It was so hard on them for the past 12 years.
The borders were controlled by people other than the government themselves, and humanitarian aid was not allowed in before the earthquake as well. These are all factors. And maybe she didn't include that the borders were controlled because she's part of the UN, but that's it. It's a huge part.
We paid the highest price. And now I think it's time to think, how can we really not just alleviate their suffering and mitigate it? How can we end it?
Rula, thank you for another conversation. I appreciate it. Senior Communication Advisor with the UNHCR.
Here's another from The Guardian. And notice the biased language here. I'll try my best to edit it. Syrian leader pleads for outside help. A week on from earthquakes. This is 2 days ago. Former al-Nusra Front chief keen to show scale of crisis in Idlib province and play down past links to al-Qaeda. A Syrian leader with a $10 million U.S. government bounty on his head has appealed for urgent international aid to help the northwest province of Idlib after the earthquakes that have killed thousands and brought the last opposition-controlled area to its knees. And it's very interesting that in a time of despair and division, further divisions are created by way of pointing out that this person is a rebel and has a bounty on his head, as opposed to just focusing on the situation. It becomes a little bit redundant here. The UN needs to understand that it's required to help in crisis, said Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, better known as Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. Jalani was officially designated, we're not going to go into that. While Washington has lifted sanctions on the earthquake aged Damascus, a political fight continues between international actors, the administration in northwest Syria and the government of Bashar al-Assad. Some international actors have proposed the reopening of other crossings into northern Syria, notably Bab al-Salam, which leads to areas in the far north of Aleppo province still under control. Many in these areas, including Jalani, say the Assad regime cannot be trusted to deliver aid, and that humanitarian assistance should pass via the northwest and into other areas affected by the quake, which has left an estimated 5.3 million homeless. A UN spokesperson said on Sunday that the aid passing through the opposition-controlled territory has also been held up by HTS. All humanitarian assistance must be permitted to move through all border crossings, the spokesperson for the U.S. National Security Council said on Sunday. As part of the UN, block the border. And finally, you got a tweet from Elijah Manier, a wonderful journalist. For the first time, Saudi Arabia plane landed in Aleppo after 12 years of boycott. Saudi rescue teams and trucks have already been sent to the affected area of West Syria. So we're going to watch this space, and we'll be back with more Al-Aqsa to All News. And remember, your engagement through the like, the share, and the subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Russia and Iran may cancel visas. Russia and Iran may cancel visas for citizens of the two countries. Tehran's waiting for a response from Russian officials, Iranian ambassador to Russia Qasem Jalali said Monday. There's such a prospect. Iran agrees with the abolition of visas between the two countries. They've even taken steps in our country for this issue. We're waiting for the opinion of Russian officials. This is from news.am. If Russia, too, like us, would declare that there's such readiness, we can announce a visa-free regime in a short time, Jalali said at a press conference when asked whether the prospect of achieving a visa-free regime between the two countries this year is now evident. From our side, there is a full readiness for the abolition of visas between our countries. If Russia takes such a decision at the highest level, we can even announce visa-free regime between our countries in 2023 in the coming months, the head of the Iranian diplomatic mission added. And from TehranTimes.com, Iran and Russia one step closer to implementing visa waiver program. Travelers from Iran and Russia can soon benefit from the previously linked visa waiver program, Qasem Jalali said on Tuesday. Iran is currently waiting for the response from Russia regarding the cancellation of visas between Moscow and Tehran in 2023, he explained. In order to kickstart this process, Tehran also proposed to Moscow that visas for businessmen and drivers who play an important role in the trade be revoked, he noted. The agreement was initially signed by former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in 2017. Earlier this month, Mayor reported that Russian tourists are increasingly choosing Iran as a vacation destination these days. There's been a surge of Russian tourists in Iran as a result of international sanctions against Russia, the reporter added. Several factors have contributed to Russia's limited domestic and foreign tourism these days, including a recent war with Ukraine that's adversely affected the Russian tourism industry. Travel restrictions to China sanctions by the European Union and a negative image of Russia being presented in different countries, and the ban on international cards such as Visa prevent Russia from expanding its tourism. This has prompted Russian tourists to visit Asia and the Middle East instead, especially Iran as a popular tourist destination despite negative advertising. Back in December, an Iranian tourism official announced that Iran's tourism market is still unfamiliar to the majority of potential Russian travelers. Today, Russians mainly travel to destinations such as Dubai and Turkey for tourism, and one of our problems is that the Iranian market is not well known to them. The official expressed hope to reduce the gap by organizing FAM tours, B2B meetings, and forums to be attended by tourism insiders from the two countries. Early in September, tourism insiders and officials from the two countries exchanged views on education, hotel management, holding joint exhibitions, and introducing tours and investments, among others. The head of the Iranian Tour Operators Association, Ibrahim Porfaraj, believes the majority of potential Russian travelers are unaware of the vast tourist attractions that exist in every corner of Iran. The fact is that Iran's political and economic relations with Russia are considered as good, but this has nothing to do with attracting tourists because it's directly connected with the Russian people. It's the Russian people who must choose Iran as their destination. Last year, an Iranian travel expert said many Russian tourists were eager to travel to Iran, and Iranian travel expert said on Monday, recounting his Russian counterparts, many potential Russian travelers are motivated to visit novel and lesser-known destinations such as Iran that could be safe and attractive. That could be a safe and attractive destination, said Mustafa Sarvari, who presided over the tourism marketing and advertising office of the Iranian Tour Operators Association. The Islamic Republic expects to reap a bonanza from its numerous tourist spots, such as bazaars, museums, mosques, bridges, bathhouses, madrasas, mausoleums, churches, towers, mansions, of which 26 are inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Amazing. And from TehranTimes.com, February 1st, this is, Russian arrivals in Iran soar in the face of sanctions. There's been a huge surge of Russian tourists in Iran as a result of international sanctions against Russia, Mayor reported on Wednesday. Several factors have contributed to Russia's limited domestic and foreign tourism these days, including a recent war with Ukraine that's adversely affected the Russian tourism industry, travel restrictions to China, sanctions by the European Union, a negative image of Russia being presented in different countries, and the ban on international cards, such as Visa, prevent Russia from expanding its tourism. This has prompted Russian tourists to visit Asia and the Middle East instead, especially Iran. This is due to the visa waiver between Iran and Russia that's increased for Russian tourists visiting Iran. Russia's outbound tourism market was impacted by the coronavirus outbreak until months ago, but it's now growing in its completely new outlook, and Iran remains a popular tourist destination for Russians despite negative advertising. Back in December, an Iranian tourism official announced that Iran's tourism market is still unfamiliar to the majority of potential Russian travelers. Today, Russians mainly travel to destinations such as Dubai and Turkey for tourism, and one of our problems is that the Iranian market is not well known to them. The official expressed hope to reduce the gap by organizing fam tours, B2B meetings, and forums to be attended by tourism insiders from the two countries. And fam tours is slang for a familiarization tour. Early in September, tourism insiders and officials from the two countries exchanged views on education, hotel management, holding joint exhibitions, and introducing tours and events, among other issues. Furthermore, they discussed prospects of visa waiver for tourist groups based on agreement that former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, inked in 2017. The head of the Iranian Tour Operators Association, Ibrahim Porfaraj, believes the majority of potential Russian travelers are unaware of the vast tourist attractions. We just read something related to that. And at this point, let's go into
today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
So yesterday we covered Chrissy Mayer's story, and we have a bit of an update for that. Chrissy Mayer was mentioning an issue with Turkiye and Shoddy construction of their buildings.
Unable to stand against.
Hey, this is what happens when you don't use union workers. Am I right?
Yeah, so we have a joke from Mersh about not using union workers at the buildings being shoddy.
I think it's funny.
No, I think the last part is funny.
Yeah,
the union workers. That was
when I laugh at this. I'm not thinking of people dying. I'm thinking of how shitty the buildings are.
Yeah, and yesterday I thought, no, is that just like a diversion take? But I'm definitely open to information and research, and I did not dismiss the idea, and here we have an article from TimesNowNews.com. Turkey earthquake, many building contractors detained. Ankara begins gathering rubble samples for quality check. Turkish Justice Minister Bekir Bozdağ said Sunday that 134 people were being investigated for their alleged responsibility in the construction of buildings that failed to withstand the earthquake. Just a moment. Yeah, apologies if this is difficult to see. 6 days after a deadly earthquake rocked Turkey, the country's justice officials targeted more than 130 people allegedly involved in shoddy and illegal construction. The death toll from Monday's quakes that hit southeastern Turkey and northern Syria stood at 33,179 on Sunday and was certain to rise as search teams locate more bodies in the rubble, authorities said. More than 92,600 other people were injured. Meanwhile, rescuers today extricated more survivors and so on. But yeah, so 130 people allegedly involved in shoddy and illegal construction were targeted by justice officials. And here's an article from, let me stop this. Here's an article from Cairns Post. Actually, it's a bit of video.
This earthquake, these earthquakes, what's the mood now? Shona Bhattacharya stands by in Turkey with more on that. Shona, can you tell me, we're a week on now from this earthquake, these earthquakes, what's the mood now?
Well, a week on, many people are still sleeping in their cars. It depends where, of course, but in some cities like Adıyaman, most of the help is still in the form of rescue teams coming in or on site trying to pull people from the ruins. This Monday alone, 6 people so far have already been pulled alive.
I was presuming there might be a situation with the streaming for this site. Let's try another link here.
In Turkey with more on that. Shona, can you tell me, we're a week on now from this earthquake, these earthquakes, what's the mood now?
Well, a week on, many people are still sleeping in their cars. It depends where, of course, but in some cities like Adıyaman, most of the help is still have already with in some places part of the our miracles. So in the sense that they rolled out a lot to make sure they were arrested for looting. About this for a few collapse being unsafe, or at least almost everyone lost someone, but enough food.
And the political fallout from this is growing. Elections coming up in Turkey in May. How is this playing out? What's been the political impact of all of this?
Right, so pretty soon the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, admitted twice on 2 different occasions to making mistakes in not getting rescue teams on site fast enough. But since then, he says that everything is under control. Now, there's that one aspect of aid, of rescue teams not getting there fast enough. And then the other aspect is this kind of more systemic issue of building codes. The last time Turkey had a major earthquake was in 1999, and 2 years later, in 2001, earthquake codes, building codes, were put in place so that all new buildings must get this be built in accordance with engineering rules to make it so that they will not collapse in an earthquake. And unfortunately, a lot of the buildings that we're seeing that have collapsed are new. They are built after 2001. We were just at a hospital that was heavily damaged, and now all the patients have been taken outside to tents, but that hospital was built 2 years ago. So clearly there has been a very much too often regulations being circumvented, and this is something that's not only at a local level, but it's also at a central level. Turkey also has an issue with illegal housing, and that's the last amnesty for people who built houses illegally happened in 2019. So these are all very current issues we're talking about.
Okay, well.
In this one, Turkey detains building contractors as quake death passes 33,000.
Morning, authorities in Turkey are targeting more than 130 people with ties to the collapsed buildings.
Apologies if this is only the left channel. Or right, I'm not sure. My headphones may be on backwards.
That crushed thousands of families as they slept. Dozens of arrest warrants have been issued for contractors and other workers. At least 2 property developers have been arrested at airports accused of trying to flee the country.
The Justice Ministry here has formed an earthquake investigations unit that will look into deaths and injuries among residents here, and it will be an enormous task when you consider the scale of the destruction. Thousands of buildings destroyed across hundreds of miles.
As the staggering death toll rises, news stories of hope as rescuers pull more survivors from the rubble. This baby, saved 107 hours after the quake, is now in good condition. Rescuers also finding 17-year-old Asya, who spent nearly 7 days trapped beneath this building. Through the mangled rebar, they pulled her to safety. 1, 2, 3, another group counts, pulling 10-year-old Cuddy through a hole cut in the floor. In another town, 9-year-old Semi is placed on a stretcher while asking, "Can you bring me strawberry ice cream?" As the rescue effort turns to recovery, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding with a cholera outbreak in Syria and an estimated 5 million people left homeless.
Yeah, so, a lot of that's paired with the despair, but I'm just looking for the information on the arrests due to the collapsed buildings. So several contractors are arrested by Turkish authorities as rescue workers continue to pull survivors' bodies from quake rubble in southeastern Turkiye. Turkish Justice Minister Bekir Bozdağ has vowed to take action against negligence over the deadly quakes. A number of new arrests have been made in Turkiye after 2 major earthquakes jolted southeastern Turkiye and northwestern Syria last week. Nazmi Tosun, the construction supervisor and technical representative of Emre Apartment, which was destroyed in Gaziantep province, was arrested in Istanbul on early Monday. Malatya prosecutors also issued arrest warrants for 31 people over collapsed buildings in the city. Police arrested Hasan Alpargun in the Turkish Republic of northern Cyprus after some buildings made by his construction company collapsed in the southern Adana province over the weekend, according to security forces. Contractor Ibrahim Mustafa Ankuoglu was arrested in Istanbul after technical examination of the wreckage of an apartment building in the Gaziantep province found neglect. Istanbul police arrested another contractor, Mehmet Ertan Akay, after his building collapsed during the quake in Gaziantep. Prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Akay on charge of reckless manslaughter and building code violations. Mohammed Yasser Kaskun, the contractor of a large residential building in the Hardiyat Hatay province, was also taken into custody on Saturday. Earlier, security forces arrested Kaskun at Istanbul airport on his way to Montenegro while attempting to leave Turkey. Kaskun claimed that he did not know why the building was destroyed and that his flight to Montenegro had nothing to do with the collapsed building. All right, watch this space. Remember that your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists are supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man. I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled. You mean they should have respected us? Of course. Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again, which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
The whole notion of logic.
How we feel about our life here, about each other.
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Israel to lift all restrictions on construction of illegal Jewish settlements, says MiddleEastMonitor.com. Israel's finance minister has announced that the far-right government of Benjamin Netanyahu will lift all restrictions on the construction of settlements in the occupied West Bank and Palestinian territories, in a move which blatantly defies international law and Washington's displeasure. It doesn't defy Washington's displeasure. It encourages Washington's displeasure, or triggers Washington's displeasure. Right-wing extremist Bezalel Smotrich made the announcement at a press conference at the illegal West Bank outpost of Gavat Harel. The real answer to terror is to continue to build, to continue to set roots in the land of Israel.
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
Under the move, the government will approve the construction of almost 10,000 housing units in the West Bank, including 2,000 that have already been built, and the further 4,300 units that will be given the green light in May. This is what we as a government, as a state, as a nation must do, insisted Smotrich. The settlement enterprise thrives thanks to the pioneers who have sustained it for many years with great love, with great determination, with great consistency and efficiency. He added that the coalition government, the most extreme in Israel's history of extreme governments, has confirmed the approval of 10 settlement outposts which were built illegally even under Israeli law. My coalition partners understand that this is a logical move.
The whole notion of logic.
Insisting that these moves are just the beginning of the further expansion of the Zionist project and occupation, the ministry said he will try to push for more settlement authorization. We must lift all the restrictions on construction in the West Bank. This area must function like any other in the state of Israel. The occupied West Bank, however, is not recognized as an area of the state of Israel. It's occupied territory, and all settlements are illegal under international law, which Israel treats with contempt. Tel Aviv's move was condemned by the U.S. yesterday, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken stating somewhat meekly that we strongly oppose such unilateral measures which exacerbate tensions and undermine the prospects for a negotiated two-state solution. State Department spokesperson Ned Price dismissed it as Israel making its own sovereign decisions, despite our very strong opinion against the move. Both U.S. officials failed to outline any actions that Washington could take against its ally. Smotrich similarly brushed away the opposition to the plans. The White House is well aware of Tel Aviv's policy, he said. We have joint interests, but we communicate our policy and our own interests to the Americans, and the administration knows our commitment to settlements. Since Netanyahu was voted in and formed his far-right coalition last year, Israel's grown bolder in its aim to expand the legal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It no longer seems to care about maintaining its democratic image in the international community. The new government's position of Jewish supremacy became clear when Netanyahu stated in December that the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. The government will promote and develop settlement in all the parts of the land of Israel, in the Galilee, the Negev, the Golan, and the West Bank. Meanwhile, it remains unlikely that the construction will be approved or implemented for Palestinian housing in Area C of the West Bank, which the previous government had approved. This is from 972mag.com, an academic cover for demonizing Palestine solidarity. The Journal of Contemporary Anti-Semitism misrepresents its scholarly bona fides while conflating Palestine solidarity activism with anti-Jewish bigotry. At the beginning of January, Israel's new National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, ordered police to enforce a ban on the flying of Palestinian flags in public spaces. For many who have followed Ben-Gvir's rise and Israel's steady turn toward openly fascist politics, this move has come as no surprise. The demonization of the Palestinian flag, however, is by no means an exclusively Israeli phenomenon. Almost exactly a year earlier, a paper titled "The Palestinian Flag as a Tool of Oppression" was published in the Journal of Contemporary Anti-Semitism. This article and others like it warrant attention not for their intellectual theft, but as an illustration of the kind of highly politicized work masquerading as rigorous academic research on anti-Semitism that's becoming increasingly prevalent today, from the UK to the United States, Germany, and beyond. The JCO describes itself as a leading scholarly publication in the field. Indeed, it appears to be the only active English-language journal devoted entirely to the study of anti-Semitism. And if it's the only one, it is a leader, so that wasn't a lie. It's currently published biannually by the U.S.-based Academic Studies Press and has released 10 issues since launching in the fall of 2017. In addition to publishing double-blind, peer-reviewed articles, and we know what maybe we don't know what double-blind is here. Let me get a denotation of that. Double-blind. Double-blind peer reviews, the identity of both the author and the reviewer is kept hidden. That's not acceptable on JSTOR. For the reader, however, these articles are visually indistinguishable from peer-reviewed articles and are not identified as such in the issue's table of contents. I mean, that's the crux of academic integrity, and that's the science behind academic journals. So if you eliminate that, then there's no checks, there's no analysis. There's not even. I mean, the data can be questioned because there's no analysis. Let's say that. Ewan Phillips, who wrote the article on the Palestinian flag, is the head of media for the British anti-Semitism watchdog, Labour Against Anti-Semitism. Quite how this amounts to the label of a distinguished senior researcher is not explained. Whoa.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
Ewan Phillips, who wrote this article on the Palestinian flag, is the head of media for the British anti-Semitism watchdog Labour Against Anti-Semitism. How this amounts to the label of distinguished senior researcher is not explained. The aim of his paper, published as one of the journal's target articles, was to examine Palestine solidarity protests held across the UK in response to Israel's bombing of the Gaza Strip in May 2021, and to assess the way the signifiers of the pro-Palestinian movement convey aggressive anti-Semitic meanings. Early on, it's become clear that this paper is in fact not an academic argument or assessment at all. For one, it's lacking any consideration of the semiotics of flags, how they relate to memory, culture, and identity. that one would accept from a scholarly article on the topic. Second, of the 50 different references cited, only 3 are from academic sources. The rest refer to Twitter posts, newspaper articles, and political organizations such as Labour Friends of Israel, a pro-Israel group within the UK's Parliamentary Labour Party. The Pro-Israel Organization Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, and prominent British Zionist campaigner and blogger David Collier, who believes that Palestine is not a real place, but a colonial invention, among others. Moreover, the narratives around which the article is structured are the holy trinity of Hasbara. The occupation of Palestine is complex. Support for the Palestinian struggle equates to support for Hamas, and the Palestinian Solidarity Movement is demonizing Israel out of hatred of Jews. Wow. Holy Trinity of Hasbara. Hasbara has no direct English translation, but roughly means explaining. It's a communicative strategy that seeks to explain actions whether or not they're justified. Interesting. As it focuses on providing explanations about one's action, Hasbara has been called a reactive and event-driven approach. Hasbara. Ignoring the real-world repercussions of Zionism, it's unclear how Phillips fits to the definition of distinguished senior researcher. The same can be said of a paralegal working for the British Financial Conduct Authority, who penned an article in the JCA in 2020 titled, "Did a Corbyn-led government pose an existential threat to Jewish life in the UK? Revolutionary States and the Destruction of Jewish Communities." This article, whose title refers to a declaration published jointly on the front pages of Britain's 3 biggest Jewish newspapers in July 2018, argues that a hypothetical Corbyn administration should not be measured by its election manifesto, but by Corbyn's perceived affinity to the Venezuelan, Cuban, and above all, Iranian regimes. This, I presume we've got to do a huge Corbyn expose, because that was a huge pivotal thing, especially for UK progressive politics. This article makes no attempt to establish a comparative framework or methodology. Rather, it simply describes the histories of Jewish communities in these countries and transplants their fate into a fictional Great Britain led by Jeremy Corbyn. Again, similarly to Phillips' article, only 5 of the 65 references are academic in nature. It's not only non-peer-reviewed articles that don't stand up to scrutiny, but also several of the regular articles which are subject to peer review. One such article is by David Hirsch, a senior lecturer at Goldsmiths University of London, academic director and CEO of the newly launched London Center for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and an editorial consultant for the JCA. In his piece, Hirsch tries to make the case that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism by completely ignoring the real-world repercussions of Zionism as a political movement and instead reducing it to a subjective expression of Jewish identity. The article evades any discussion of Zionism as the ideological engine behind the establishment of the State of Israel as a Jewish state at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian people, and as the force that continues to determine its policies toward Palestinians in their land today. Again, Hirsch's article does not provide much scholarship among the works it references, nor does he offer any methodological framework. It remains a mystery how this article passed independent peer review. What all these articles have in common is a reliance on the assumption that the authors knew people's real motivations, regardless of what they say. It's a pseudoscientific epistemology that claims the ability to look into one's opponent's mind and know what they really mean. A pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian journal. The pseudoscientific direction and the neglect of Palestinian perspectives when Israel and Zionism are discussed in the journal might be a reflection of its leadership. JCA's editor-in-chief Leslie Claff, who teaches law at Sheffield Hallam University, argued in 2010 paper that the removal of Israel as a Jewish state would necessarily entail the annihilation of the several million Israeli Jews who live there. The JCA's and further described advocating against an exclusively Jewish state as tantamount to a Holocaust promotion. Wow. The JCA's editorial board features some prominent names in anti-Semitism, education, and pro-Israel advocacy from around the world, including Samuel Salzborn. For example, the anti-Semitism czar for the state of Berlin once tweeted, "When people on the train start talking about Palestine without any reason, it's either time to get off, put on headphones, or yell at them." Anti-Semitism. Jonathan Turner, chief executive of UK Lawyers for Israel, is known for waging lawfare campaigns against pro-Palestine student groups and individuals in academia. Professor Ephraim Karsh argued in his 2010 book Palestine Betrayal that the Nakba was exclusively of the Palestinians' own making. The most prominent member of the editorial board, however, is Deborah Lipstadt. Having risen to prominence during her libel trial against Holocaust denier David Irving in '96, she was appointed last year by the Biden administration to the position of Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Over the years, Lipstadt has accused Senator Bernie Sanders of being blind toward anti-Semitism on the left and claimed that the BDS movement and the Palestinian right of return represent a call for the destruction of the state of Israel. So some might say that, the British situation with anti-Semitism and the U.S. situation with anti-Semitism should not be equated and are in no way connected. Deborah Lipstadt is the connection. It's this ideological pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian framework that runs through the journal's output and devalues academic publishing as part of the scientific pursuit of knowledge. When a journal uses its reputation as a leading scholarly publication that follows best academic practice to launder pseudoscientific articles attacking or devaluing Palestinian existence, it does a disservice not only to academia as a field, but more importantly to serious academics who dedicate their work and careers to fighting real anti-Semitism and racism. And from yidinfo.net, an Israel cabinet minister rejects U.S. criticism of settlements. Despite resistance from Biden administration, Israel Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich vowed on Tuesday to support unrestricted construction in Jewish settlements in West Bank. So this article immediately shows its bias, wherein West Bank is the name, not Judea and Samaria, legally and otherwise. The Security Cabinet on Sunday unanimously resolved to legalize 9 outposts, and Smotrich stated at a meeting of his religious Zionism party in Givat Harel that the genuine reaction to Palestinian terror is to continue to expand, to continue to lay roots in the land of Israel. We as a government, as a state, as a country must do it. He said that the pioneers who have supported the settlement venture for many years with tremendous passion and tenacity are to be commended for its success. The Biden administration is aware that our government is dedicated to the settlements, he continued, adding that the American response is justified. There's nothing improper with two friends arguing. They comprehend, and things will stay that way moving forward. Smotrich added that the government must remove all impediments to the West Bank total development. He declared, "This is what will happen. This land may be treated exactly like that or any other part of Israel." The deepest ministry body responsible for approving new construction in the West Bank, the Civil Administration Higher Planning Committee, was called into session in the coming days to support new residential units in other existing communities outside the Green Line. The Security Cabinet was announced on Sunday. Smotrich, a minister in the Defense Ministry, who has been given responsibility for managing the civil administration by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, declared that he would shortly forward plans to build an extra 10,000 homes in Judea and Samaria. According to a statement by Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday, the U.S. responded by saying it was deeply troubled by the potential move to advance reported nearly 10,000 settlement units and to begin a process to retroactively legalize 9 outposts in the West Bank that were previously illegal under Israeli law. According to the State Department, its position is consistent with those of previous Democratic and Republican administrations, which strongly reject such unilateral moves which heighten tensions and impair the prospects for a negotiated two-state. After so there we have it. And keep in mind, as we are continuing to be together here, your engagement through a like, share, and a subscribe will propel us at warp speed. That is warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. So, to end out, we want to read a few comments from some videos that we partook in today. This is from the Simpcast from Chrissy Mayer's post. It says, let's see, anything interesting? Yeah, keep up the great work, ladies. Good show. Definitely. Yep, honestly given, and this is more related to Eliza. I won't do that. Guess I need to subscribe if I want to catch the Simpcast. Matt Allred 8601. Yeah. DeRay Hander 1613. Great show. Just because I'm being paid to say it doesn't mean it isn't true. Free Brittany Venti for sure. Yeah, let's look down at the let's see how many. First of all, let's see how many views this has. It may not have that many comments. Oh yeah, for sure. This is the UN this is the UN video. Syria opens 2 more borders crossing for humanitarian aid. Let's see. Red 222. They should have opened all roads for aid stopping or stop caring about the war and start helping the people, it says. Tree Ring 8228 says trauma is an understatement for what these people have been through from the earthquakes. A lot of empathy here. Isaac Malcolm 8595. Too damn proud to ask for help from people. And where's Allah in this country? Wow. And then Rhubarb Pie 5232 says the U.S. and Western sanctions do not allow humanitarian aid coming to Syria. Yeah, and that should be the narrative, right? The U.S. Western sanctions and also the UN. The UN should be focused on. Russia should be focused on. Syria should be focused on. This scapegoating about HT. Is it HTS? Yeah, HTS is absolutely a distraction. Let's see. This one has 21,000 views, so it should have a good amount of comments here. Man, a lot of these are fatalistic and scatological. Check this one out. I mean, no matter what, only one we should know that all these events is not wonder. It's right as the word of God, as telling us, saying in the last days, you shall hear earthquakes, famine, wars in many places. Don't be afraid and fear for all that's, this is the only small beginning of the tribulation. So we only must be alert and be awake for ourselves to prepare our life alone. Yeah. Oh, wow. That was user-DE8LU8TR6I. Manmani, help should have come on the first day itself. Amar Sohail 7901, people need assistance and support. Don't politics or not politics help the people through anyways? Beautiful, empathetic, liberal 5204 says, as an empathetic, feminine, and liberal-minded progressive, my heart goes out to all the LGBTQ and BAME affected by this disaster. Yeah, what is BAME? Let's look that up. BAME. Oh, okay. So-called black, Asian, and minority ethnic. Now I feel sorry for Syrian. Please help them. That's Miss Eviera. JPatchy3889. Why they delayed action? How many lives could have been saved in the interim? Just like the Russian Kursk submarine disaster, Putin refused American rescue operation immediately, and 100 sailors perished. Yeah, I guess you could say that because Russia and Syria, they vetoed having those border crossings open, so that's the reason why they've been closed otherwise. And after the tragedy occurred, after the earthquake happened, that didn't change. It was the same issue. All right, so lastly we have two-state delusion. Some comments on that. No, lots of comments on this one. How many hits do we have? This is 8,000 views, so not that many actually. Okay. You are my light in a very dark world. That's nice. Well documented everywhere. You said here's right. True facts. Pretty strong arguments. Let's see. Great stuff. Sad to see so little views, but that's an unfortunate burden for those that tell the truth about the empire. Well, that aged well. Yeah. Agreed that in practice it's been a distraction, but the problem is that Israel and the U.S. never wanted a solution for the Palestinians of any kind. Not that they pursued a two-state solution. In principle, it could work if the will was there. Very good points, but you didn't need to have an annoying, distracting music. That is agree. I almost want to thumbs that up, right? Good information on things we should be taught in school and shown on the nightly news, right? You're just missing the S on your chest. Great applause. Yeah, this should be in curriculum. Like these points. In fact, these points will be in curriculum, because apartheid, I mean, what are you going to do? Even after all those people are removed, there's no borders to Israel. It's going to continue. Jordan, Syria, it's going to continue. The destabilization of Syria is going to continue, and Israel will take advantage of that. The one-state solution requires one thing: to recognize that Israel was an illegitimate settler colonial state. So Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs. How about Eastern European Ashkenazis and Arabs can peacefully live together? Yeah. See, so this person, Destructive Blade 843, is brainwashed and lost. When you start saying Jews and Arabs, all right, very honest, straightforward, factual, great. Yeah. So there we have it. And I'm going to open a channel here. Yep, just remember, like, share, subscribe, propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Beam me up, Mr. Spock. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.